The tanker sideswiped Alex's rig.
Like, he was an old logger and gold miner, and, he did just about a little bit of everything.
Me and Daryl come from the same piece of cloth.
And if it hadn't been for Daryl, I don't know if I ever would have made it through that first.
Some of these drivers crossed frozen lakes that could swallow a 40-ton rig in seconds, and they walked away fine. It was what happened after the cameras stopped rolling that nearly destroyed them. One driver never made it home from a trade show. Another driver caused an explosion so big that neighbors blocks away felt it through their windows. And one trucker survived a head-on crash that he never saw coming, then chose to go right back out on the ice anyway. By the end of this video you will understand why so many people say the real danger on this show was never the ice at all. Let's get into it. We start with Daryl Ward, the driver most fans still think about first when this show comes up. Ward grew up around trucks in Montana, the kind of upbringing where you're driving farm equipment before you're old enough to drive a car on the street. He joined Ice Road Truckers in its 6th season and quickly became one of the most recognized faces on the show, known for his easy grin, his backwards cap, and his habit of helping rookies who had no business being out on the ice in the first place. He wasn't just there to win the season. He was there because he genuinely loved the work, and viewers could tell the difference. In August of 2016, Ward had just finished making appearances at the Great American Trucking Show in Dallas. He was flying back to Montana with a pilot named Mark Melitz, planning to start filming a new project about recovering old plane wrecks. As the small Cessna came in for landing near Missoula, witnesses say the aircraft suddenly veered sharply just feet above the runway, clipped a stand of trees, and went down along the interstate. Both men died at the scene. Federal investigators spent almost a year looking into what went wrong and never found a mechanical reason for the crash. They simply couldn't explain why the plane turned the way it did in its final seconds. Ward was 52 years old, and the irony that haunted fans for years afterward is that he was on his way to start a show about plane wreckage when his own plane went down. Next is Art Burke, the Canadian driver who joined the show in its 7th season and stuck around for 5 years. Known for a personality big enough to fill the screen even next to veterans like Hugh Rowland and Alex Debogorski. After the show wrapped, Burke largely disappeared from the public eye, and what eventually surfaced about his life off camera was something nobody expected from a guy known for hauling freight across frozen lakes. In late 2018, Burke was inside his apartment in Yellowknife attempting to make a cannabis concentrate known as shatter, a process that requires releasing a large volume of butane gas in an enclosed space. Something ignited the gas, and the explosion blew the bathroom door off its hinges, damaged the building so badly that repairs ran into the tens of thousands of dollars, and left Burke with burns covering close to 40% of his body. He spent nearly 2 weeks in the hospital recovering. It took almost 2 years for the legal side to play out, but in 2020 Burke pleaded guilty to a rarely used charge called arson by negligence. The judge handling the case didn't hold back, calling the whole incident the result of plain carelessness, and pointed out that the building housed people who had very little else, including a group of older residents who treated the place like a second family. Burke was sentenced to 18 months of house arrest, with conditions that barred him from drugs, alcohol, and weapons of any kind, and he was ordered to pay tens of thousands of dollars in restitution. He even managed to frustrate the judge further by showing up late to his own sentencing hearing over a scheduling mix-up. These days Burke keeps a much lower profile, occasionally surfacing online under a different presence, but the man fans remember as fearless on the ice is now mostly known for a very different kind of fire. Then there's Hugh Rowland, known to longtime fans simply as the Polar Bear, one of the original faces of the franchise alongside Alex Debogorski. Rowland had the kind of gravelly, no-nonsense presence that made him a natural focal point in the early seasons, and he was famously unbothered by the cameras, once telling producers they could film him all they wanted as long as they stayed out of his way. His exit from the show wasn't planned and it wasn't pretty. In 2014, Rowland was riding as a passenger in a vehicle driven by one of the show's own producers, Will Morrison, when the vehicle left the road and crashed into a stand of trees. Rowland suffered serious injuries to the lower half of his body, injuries severe enough that he was never able to return to trucking the way he had before. What came next surprised even longtime fans. Rowland filed a lawsuit against Morrison, alleging that reckless driving caused the crash, and the legal filings revealed something far more personal than a simple injury claim. Rowland said the damage to his body had also ended his ability to be intimate with his wife, and that the strain this put on his marriage was part of the harm he was seeking to address. The lawsuit never got the kind of mainstream press coverage you'd expect, and Rowland quietly vanished from the show without a proper send-off. He hasn't returned to ice trucking on camera since, though he still shows up occasionally at truck shows to meet fans, and he has stayed busy running a construction business back home with his family. Now we get into Mark Kohakewicz, who fans no less as a daredevil driver and more as the steady hand running Polar Industries out of Winnipeg, the company responsible for hauling freight across some of the most unforgiving terrain in northern Canada. Kohakewicz first appeared in Season 5 and became a bigger presence as the show went on, eventually stepping in to drive Daryl Ward's truck and operate heavy equipment during the 10th season, proving he wasn't just a businessman watching from the sidelines. His interest in the North reportedly started as a university student, when ice fishing trips with a friend kept pushing further and further into remote territory, and he started noticing how much freight was moving through areas with no real infrastructure. That curiosity eventually became a business. One of the moments Kohakewicz is best remembered for happened in 2017, when flooding washed out the only railway connecting the town of Churchill, Manitoba to the rest of the country. Without that rail line, the town had no reliable way to receive fuel or food before winter set in. Kohakewicz organized crews to build and run an ice road specifically to get supplies into Churchill before Christmas, with workers pulling shifts of 14 to 18 hours in brutal conditions to make it happen. Unlike most of the names on this list, Kohakewicz's story since the show ended has stayed remarkably quiet. No arrests, no lawsuits, no scandals. He's simply kept doing the work, which in its own way says something about how different survival looks once the cameras are gone. Coming in at number 3 is Todd Dewey, who joined the show in Season 7 and built a reputation as one of the fastest and most reliable drivers in the Yukon, especially when it came to chaining up a rig before tackling a steep grade. Dewey wasn't the loudest personality on the show, but he didn't need to be, since his driving did most of the talking. In January of 2019, while hauling a load of logs near Shelton, Washington, Dewey was driving south on Highway 101 when a sedan crossed the center line and slammed head-on into his truck. The two people inside the car, a 65-year-old man and his passenger, were killed instantly. Dewey himself walked away physically unharmed. Investigators later determined that black ice and excessive speed on the part of the other driver caused the crash, and Dewey was cleared of any wrongdoing. But being cleared and being okay are two very different things, and Dewey was open about how hard it was to move past what he witnessed that morning. He posted a message on social media shortly afterward thanking people for their support and urging others to be careful on the road, a small but telling sign of how shaken he was. Friends say he avoided long overnight hauls for a long time after that, sticking closer to home and shorter routes. Even so, the pull of the work never fully left him, and after stepping away from the show for years, Dewey returned for a new season in 2025, reuniting with familiar faces from the Yukon crews he used to run with. Going back out on the same kind of roads after everything he'd seen says a lot about what these drivers are willing to carry just to keep doing the job they love. At number 2 we have Lisa Kelly, probably the most recognizable name to come out of this entire franchise. Kelly joined in Season 3 and quickly proved she belonged on the same icy roads as drivers twice her size, eventually becoming one of the most consistent and respected haulers on the show across multiple seasons. She wasn't handed any favors early on, going unpaid for her first stretch on the show and having to prove herself from scratch in an industry that wasn't exactly welcoming to women behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler. Over time that respect became impossible to ignore, and Kelly built a reputation less for being fearless and more for being precise, calm, and dependable in situations that would rattle far more experienced drivers. Kelly's story also carries real weight because of her connection to Daryl Ward. The two were business partners who co-owned a trucking operation together, and when Ward died in 2016, Kelly was left to manage both her grief and the responsibility of keeping their shared business running. She didn't walk away from it. She kept hauling freight and kept the company going, which fans have pointed to as one of the more quietly impressive parts of her story, since it never got the dramatic spotlight that other off-camera events on this list received. As of 2025, Kelly is still actively trucking in Alaska, and she shares occasional glimpses of her life away from the road with her husband and their horses. There's no scandal attached to her name and no legal trouble, just a long career built entirely on showing up and doing the work, which after everything else on this list, is its own kind of remarkable. And at number 1, there's Alex Debogorski, the only driver to appear in every single season the original show ever aired. Debogorski became the closest thing this franchise has to a mascot, known for his sense of humor, his steady nerves, and his habit of treating the ice itself almost like a living thing he had learned to listen to. He's talked openly about cracking his truck window in brutal sub-zero temperatures just so he could hear the ice shifting beneath him, treating every creak and groan as information rather than noise. That kind of instinct, paired with decades of experience, is part of why he became the face fans trusted most whenever a route looked impossible. Since the show wound down, Debogorski has stayed visible in ways that feel true to who he was on camera. He tours and gives talks about trucking history, has published a memoir detailing his life on the road, and has continued sharing stories from his decades behind the wheel through newer platforms aimed at trucking audiences. Unlike almost everyone else on this list, his post-show life has been free of arrests, lawsuits, or tragedy, and at home he's remained devoted to his large family. If there's a lesson in his story, it's that surviving the ice roads for as long as he did was never really about recklessness. It was about respect for how dangerous that world actually is, and knowing exactly when to push and when to back off. So that's where these drivers stand heading into 2025. One gone in a crash nobody can fully explain. One who nearly burned down an apartment building making cannabis concentrate and ended up sentenced for it. One whose career and marriage were appended by a single reckless drive. One steadily building a freight empire out of frozen wilderness. One who walked away from a fatal crash only to go right back out on the ice years later. One who kept a business alive after losing her partner. And one who simply never stopped. The ice roads made for great television, but it's clear the real story was always what happened once the trucks were parked and the cameras went dark. If any of these stories surprised you, let us know which one hit hardest in the comments, and if you want more deep dives like this one, stick around for what's coming next.